do it. Sitting down for week 2. Welcome back to the Creatine Show. If you are joining me again after my first ever episode last week, it's so much fun to have you back. And today we're going to get straight into it. I've got 4 topics that I would love to chat about with you. We're going to be covering the creatine to steroid algorithm pipeline, some beverages that have been launched already, even just in the first 3 weeks of this year, as well as endogenous creatine, how much our body actually produces and carries on a daily basis, and also a couple of new studies that have come out even just in the last couple of days. So to kick things off, I had a really nice meeting probably about 2 weeks ago. I had the pleasure of being introduced to the Hooton Foundation, which is a charity based out of the United States that are on a mission to help educate young people, athletes, boys specifically, about the dangers of performance and physique enhancing substances. And so that's going to include anabolic steroids as well as human growth hormone. They talk about energy drinks as well, and then also dietary supplements. So this introduction was really fantastic because we are still getting so many questions about whether creatine is a steroid or not. Can it be abused? Is it safe? Mainly parents ask us questions like this. So the Hooton Foundation was founded out of a very personal and tragic family story. Donald, who I spoke to there, lost his younger brother when he was a teenager to a steroid-induced depression, which is a very unspoken aspect of steroid use. So when you come off them, it can result in serious depressive episodes, and that's sadly how Donald's younger brother lost his life. Now, what does that have to do with creatine? Well, there's also something going on that I've really noticed in the last couple of weeks, which is that if I scroll on Instagram for a certain amount of time, and after a while the algorithm will start feeding me reels that are 2 things. It goes from pure creatine information, and then it transitions to creatine in combination with White Monster energy drinks. If you know about this phenomenon, I don't know what's going on, but this White Monster thing is just very much blowing up in our algorithm at least. And then after a while, it'll start giving me hints about using steroids, being on a steroid cycle, and then it even has taken me to places where I've seen a couple of Instagram users that are actually showing themselves using injectables. And so we discussed that with Donald Hooton, and I'm very excited to be having him as a guest over on the Jeryous Seizing the Years podcast later this summer. And my dad Steve and I are also going to be going on Donald's show. There is so much grey space in terms of how you can transition from the topic of creatine, which is the most studied supplement of all time. It's very safe. And then there's this grey area where it sort of still sits on the cusp of substance abuse and dangerous things that young people are still being sort of led into using to achieve results faster, have more extreme results. And this topic has been around since the very beginning. And during my meeting with Donald, he was asking, why has that happened, that creatine has ended up being so closely sort of bucketed and linked in the minds of some people to true steroids, anabolic steroids that are changing your hormonal function biologically. And it's purely because of that initial marketing play in the early 90s when creatine was starting to be sold in the United States. It just so seamlessly fit into that sort of California Muscle Beach bodybuilder archetype, and it lived there for quite a long time. And that's something that in retrospect, of course, there's some amazing people and companies that helped get creatine to where it is today, but there has been this sort of stereotype and this this fixed identity crisis that creatine kind of has. And it's very important also for me to just remind you all again that creatine is not a steroid. It doesn't change your hormonal function at all, and it doesn't actually change any of the natural cycles in your body to perform differently. It just enhances a very natural cellular energy process, and it's interesting that in 2026, one of the first things that we've decided to tackle as a company is still this misinformation around creatine and the link to steroids and the way that it still lives in that ecosystem. So if that's something that you do want to know more about, I would highly recommend checking out the Hooton Foundation podcast, which is called All Me, I'm quite sure, and definitely following their work for the rest of this year. Fantastic message that needs to be shared as much as possible. So yeah, if you're also following and getting a lot of this content about White Monster and then creatine and then that sort of taking you into a more scary steroid place on the internet, please let me know what you think about that. And if you're a parent, how are you managing your kids asking questions about that as well? Because it's something that's stuck around for 30 years and we don't seem to be quite rid of it just yet. Moving on to some of these beverages that have been launching already just in the first 22 days of 2026. We've seen some beverages launch or announce that they will be coming out in May and in the early springtime. And I'm curious how this is all going to go down. So I'm an advocate for the ready-to-consume movement with creatine. We're already there, and we're going to see more and more of that in 2026. It's basically just a commercial response to all of the search engine interest and sort of mainstream media hype that admittedly did happen in 2025. And so you're now seeing all of those products come to market that people had the idea of when creatine was really on all of the front page newspapers and making headlines last year. But I'm curious how we are expecting these companies and these brands to clarify the stability data and where we're setting that standard as an industry. And we're seeing kind of two extremes here. We saw absolutely ruthless takedowns and cancellation in the gummy space, but then we're now seeing beverages being launched, and on their Instagrams and on their websites, a lot of them are not even mentioning what the stabilization technology is, if there's any, and they're also not showing any graphs or data that is really showing sort of that 12 to 18 month shelf life expectancy and how well creatine is actually maintaining its bioavailability and efficacy in a beverage. So it's interesting. Yes, I am seeing some of these brands respond to comments on social media saying that if you manage creatine in a recipe that has the correct range of pH levels, so that's the acidity of a drink, as well as the temperature and a combination of other ingredients, you can make creatine be relatively stable, which from my knowledge and also working with our own product development team and like bioengineers, I know that to be true as well, but I've never seen results from anything that's made us feel remotely confident that we could actually launch something or that it would be a serious breakthrough. So there's a lot of comments on some of these emerging brands' social medias where the average consumer is asking questions and that they would like to see more data around that. The industry needs a more technological breakthrough here. I don't think we're going to have kind of the big, long-lasting breakthrough creatine drink necessarily even hit the market in the first 6 months of this year. And so I'm not really looking to consumer brands for this breakthrough information. I think if you're interested in that space, you definitely need to be tracking more across the space of like research labs and startups that are doing more sort of like true bioengineering. Actually, that's what the creatine in liquid question really calls for. More than just product development, you kind of need to go a step back and actually look at the molecular function and activity of creatine in water. And so it's just very interesting to see some of these sodas and drinks coming out onto the market. I will mention that most of them are capping their creatine content around 2 grams to 2.5 grams. And this is either using absolutely no breakthrough technology and not releasing any stability data, or they are using some existing creatine stabilization technology, which if you follow in the industry, you'll probably know which one I'm talking about, and I'm just wondering if the consumer is really if this is really gonna fly for the consumer, right? So especially if you were somebody that had bought gummies last year and then told that they're not stable, besides a couple of brands, are we expecting the consumer to go through that whole process again of buying things out of uncertainty, and then maybe later on some independent studies are done and they feel like they were a bit fleeced by it? So I'm excited. I do love to follow and track that space, but I haven't seen anything yet that is really going to set a new standard. And I would also say that the average brand is a little bit ahead now and more educated. The average consumer is a little bit more ahead and educated than they were last year, and they're not just going to blindly start buying beverages that are not shown as actually being stable. So interesting one to follow, and I'll definitely be discussing that more as we get through the end of winter and into the springtime here. I have a new guest writer on the Jeryous blog. Her name is Isabel. She's Australian but has lived in Switzerland for more than 20 years, or touching 20 years, I'm quite sure. Isabel, if you're watching this, please correct me if I'm wrong. But she wrote a piece for my Jeryous blog, which is coming out tomorrow, and I was actually hit with a new statistic about the human body and how much creatine, natural creatine, is in our bodies. And she told me, based on a study from, or a resource that she cited from 2007, which is the International Society of Sports Nutrition's position stand, creatine supplementation and exercise, which was led by Buford and Kreider and Stout, a lot of those great names in the research space. Anyway, I'll get straight to it. What am I talking about? An average adult body stores between 70 to 120 grams of creatine naturally. And if you are a training athlete or a high performance individual, then you might even have up to 160 grams of creatine if you're a larger person in your body. This is mind-blowing to me, because we talk about supplementing 3 to 5 being safe or not, while you actually have a natural supply in your body that can be more than 100 grams. And I'm just really enjoying the emphasis on the natural production of creatine in the human body, and then secondary to that also the dietary creatine as a follow-on from my topic last week about the food pyramid. And so this just really blew me away. What I did already know is that 95% of this natural creatine that the body carries around in the cellular system is stored in your skeletal muscle, and the rest of it, that other 5%, is going to be in your brain and your heart, so those high functioning muscles as well, ultimately, right? And your liver and your kidneys produce about 1 gram of creatine a day, so that's just a natural production process which brings together those 3 absolutely key components, which is glycine, arginine and methionine. But the idea of having 70 to 100 plus grams of creatine naturally in your body is just outstanding to me. I'd never thought about it that way, and for some reason I'd assumed that if your body is creating about 1 gram and then you're supplementing maybe 3 to 5, I thought that number would have been way lower. And so thank you, Isabel, for educating me and giving me a great new statistic. I'm definitely going to be highlighting that in some of my upcoming conversations as well. And so logically, what does that really mean? Well, it just really again highlights the fact that supplementing creatine, even though that is a synthetic substance in the way that it's manufactured today, you're not adding a foreign drug to your body, and you're just topping up your tank basically, which is completely essential for cellular energy and the ATP cycle. So yeah, I really want people to stop seeing creatine as a bodybuilder powder and start seeing it as this fundamental biological requirement. You know, whether you want to supplement or not, that is a personal decision, especially while we're still living in this era of creatine being synthesized chemically and not in the most natural way. Even though you can achieve very high purity levels, it's still not a natural process, and it ultimately is a chemical a chemically created thing, which, you know, comes out of that entire industry. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that. If you were curious how much natural creatine is in your body, if you're a healthy person It should be between about 70 to 120 grams. So enjoy knowing that. It was pretty cool. And then last but not least, we've had some amazing review papers come out from the science world, even just in the last week or so, and quite a lot of research has converged and come together in an interesting way. So if you follow the researchers, people that really focus on creatine and do the actual lab work to give us all of this amazing information, the focus is on the neck up, as Dr. Darren Candow really likes to say. And the whole body muscle performance thing is really quite proven out, and it seems like the science community is very much focused on this sort of brain health, brain function. Secondary to that, probably women's health and the female bodily functions over the whole lifespan. But we've seen two great reviews and one review and one study come out already, just with that 2026 date, which is exciting. It feels like the kickoff of the science season. And so we've got one that was led by Dr. Darren Candow and another one that was led by Fares. I noticed that study is also available in French, so I might be pronouncing that incorrectly. But Darren's review included many other people from the science world, and the name of it is a little bit provoking. I was unsure before they released it what it was going to be about. They're saying creatine supplementation and the brain. Have we put the cart before the horse? And so the lead up to this was a little bit uncertain for me, because I thought, wow, maybe they've actually discovered that all of this creatine brain research is not leading to the outcome that we're all hopeful of, and the promises that it seemed to be showing for brain-related conditions and age-related conditions of the brain. However, this review is really just emphasizing that 5 pillars of brain health, and these mechanisms, these cellular mechanisms and neurological mechanisms in the brain have a lot of potential for creatine to have a positive impact and play a positive role there. And so they're very scientific terms, but we're talking about ATP resynthesis, neuromodulation, neurotrophic support, antioxidant protection, and synaptic plasticity. And so this review just basically kicks off 2026 in a really nice place, and laying the foundations for the fact that, yes, creatine is very interesting for these 5 pillars of brain health. However, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done, and done in the right way, and that's going to take some time. I was talking to Darren in DMs on Instagram, and I told him I feel like this review is a really smart start to the year, because it kind of tempers some of the wild claims that you are seeing out there, and especially with big terms like Alzheimer's and dementia, and then bipolar, and the other study that's been released gets into mental disorders, depression. I've seen some content on Instagram that is a little bit far-fetched for where we are right now, and this review just kind of tempers all of that and gives the reassurance of the scientific voices in the industry, but also just says to everybody, like, hey, yeah, it's looking indicative of very promising outcomes, but there's still a lot of work to do. And I know all of these people are up for doing that work as well. So have we put the cart before the horse? Maybe from a social media and commercial standpoint, slightly, but the science is definitely on the right track. And then that second study, the effect of creatine monohydrate on mental disorders, a systematic review of randomized controlled trials. And so this also is brand new, just for the beginning of this year. And mainly the focus point here was talking about how creatine can be seen as a complement to other therapies. So looking at SSRIs, for example, for maybe people that are struggling with major depressive disorder, bipolar, and these improvements have been linked to changes in the brain energy metabolism, right? So they're talking there about a dose of as low as 2 grams a day up to 10 grams a day, and talking about it as a buddy in sort of a teamwork kind of way with adjacent therapies. So again, creatine on its own is not really going to be doing a whole lot for you. Same with the muscle and the physical benefits, right? You still need to go to the gym and work out, and that's what Susan Kleiner talks about so much. Even on LinkedIn, every time I post something, she's like, yes, but it's very important to actually get into the gym and lift heavy weights as well to see those benefits. So it seems like that's where the scientific perspective is leaning right now as well, is that we need to double down on how much creatine, for what purpose, and then also actually combining that with other therapies where they're needed, but also just lifestyle habits and routines in general, right? So again, creatine's not a silver bullet, as I always like to remind you, but there's a really promising future here and it's exciting. So whether you're interested in learning more about that sort of weird merge that still happens from creatine into the steroid world, or some of the beverages that are launching this year without too much scientific stability evidence, or the amount of creatine that is, you know, just readily moving around in your body naturally, then I think we've covered some interesting topics today, and these 2 reviews or studies will be available to you as well, and they'll be doing the rounds on social media. No matter who you follow, I'm quite sure, as it'll make its way around and you'll be seeing that as well. So thanks again for joining. I will be back next week. I already know a couple of things that I want to be talking about. I couldn't fit it all into today's episode. I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you next time.